Hi, I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, where each week we tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, from operators, technology companies, facilities companies, construction and real estate, investment-related companies, as well as outsourced sales and marketing companies, regardless of what your role is within a go-to-market team. Perhaps you're in sales, marketing, account management, or customer success, product, channel partnerships, or maybe you're the executive sponsor, the leader, the orchestra conductor that is responsible for aligning go-to-market sales and marketing and making it work well together as a unified team that gets rid of all of the friction and has a phenomenal prospect, customer, and employee experience. This week, what is on the agenda? First, we're going to talk about how to get new clients for data center solutions, network design, and implementation. Then we'll talk about how you can position yourself as a data center relocation subject matter expert, often known as a SME, not to be confused with a small and medium-sized enterprise, which is also often has the acronym of SME. Then we'll look at how to prevent fiber transport and colocation client churn. After that, we'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. And during the second half of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show, we'll talk about how a data center-related startup can request face-to-face research on industry challenges. Next, we'll look at how to use social media for data center solutions, telecommunications, and IT infrastructure lead generation. And as we head down the home stretch on this week's Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream, we'll look at how to get more new cybersecurity and IT infrastructure clients to sign up. And speaking of sign up, if you want to make sure that you stay in the loop on all of our educational resources and live events like this and webinars, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter that comes directly to your email inbox on Sundays by visiting and subscribing at www.dcsmi.com. So let's jump right in. The first question for this week is, how do we get new clients for data center solutions and network design and implementation? How do we get new clients for data center solutions, network design, and implementation? That's a great place to start. So the first question that I want to know is, are all of your clients similar? Are they pretty different? In other words, do your data center solutions clients also hire your company for network design and implementation? Or do you have a significant client base where you do network design and implementation in like a traditional office setting or an industrial park or manufacturing setting or healthcare or financial services or school or something like that? And is that business the same as the clients that you data center related work for, or is it different? Because if it's different, I would encourage you to potentially set up two different go-to-market strategies, two different sales and marketing playbooks, two different potentially sales and services delivery teams, because what they have in common is, for sure, you're in the professional services businesses, IT related, but when it comes to the average deal size, the sales cycle length, the level of training and sophistication that your system engineers will potentially need, the cost of hardware, the licenses and certifications to invest in, credentialing to invest in, they're pretty different kinds of businesses. And I've seen quite a few companies where they actually split up into two different brands. That said, you could potentially have it all in one brand. It really just depends on which one you want to be better known for, if you want to be known for both. For the sake of keeping things simple for this week's show, we're going to go with the idea that you will just simply have one website, one brand, one coherent team, and you literally have 3 different sections under your solutions part of your website. You have a data center solutions part, you have a network design solutions page, and you have an implementation page. So with all of that in mind, as long as your business is pretty well established, you probably have a collection of clients where you have done a lot of work in either of these categories, and you probably have some clients where you've done work in all 3 of these categories, the data center side as well as the network design and implementation side. The network design and implementation probably goes together really, really well. It's hard to imagine a scenario where you would do implementation if you don't get involved in doing the design. That sounds like commoditized work that isn't really that fun a place to be in for most of your company in where we are right now in the state of digital transformation and all the growth in the data center ecosystem. So what I encourage you to do is to look at your existing logos, look at your case studies page, and figure out what your most successful clients have in common. For example, where are they located? Are they all in a same relatively closely clustered together geographic area, or are they spread out throughout your region, throughout your country, throughout several different countries, throughout a whole continent? Or perhaps you're a huge company and you're able to provide data center solutions, network design and implementation services truly globally. I would suspect for the average person that is watching this podcast, it's probably somewhere in between. Perhaps you're national or maybe more than one country or something like that. So that's the first part of your ideal client profile. Your ICP is nailing down geographically where your company is in a position to market to and sell to and service most effectively, where your clients located that get the most value. The second thing that I would encourage you to look at when it comes to your data center related business, your network design and implementation business, is the size of the clients. And I know in the data center industry, when it comes to size, people look at square footage or square meters, they look at kilowatts or megawatts. The reality, though, is when it comes to your go-to-market strategy and implementing this from a practical standpoint with your marketing and sales team, you're going to probably need to standardize that, normalize that into company headcount brackets in terms of number of employees. So, for example, what company size is too small to meet your minimums? That's the lower boundary of your range. Maybe for your data center and your network design and your implementation services, it's really far-fetched that they'd be able to afford your minimums if the company doesn't have at least 50 employees or maybe at least 200 employees. At the upper end of the range, does your company truly feel comfortable? Are you truly going to be successful marketing, selling, and servicing data center, network design, and implementation for massively sized Fortune 500 companies with hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of employees? Or do you hit your ceiling where your expertise, your resources, your ability to carry capital, your ability to endure incredibly complex long sales cycles kind of maxes out at maybe 1,000 employees, maybe it's 5,000 employees, maybe it's 500 employees? Only you can answer that question. But when you look at your CRM, when you look at your customer relationship management system of the clients where you've been most successful, when you look at your testimonials and your case studies where you've been most successful, what's the upper end of the range where your likelihood of being successful really falls off a cliff? So maybe you decide that for your ideal client profile, you think you'll do well with companies that have anywhere between 50 and 500 employees. So you have your geographic component. Perhaps you've identified it's your whole country. You have a company size component. Maybe you've identified that you can be successful with data center solutions, network design, and implementation with companies that have anywhere from 50 to 500 employees. Obviously, your mileage will vary. And then when it comes to data center solutions, network design, and implementation, I also want you to consider their industry, their business model, the vertical market specialization. Why is that important? Because depending on where you're located, certain kinds of businesses have compliance requirements that your company may be either very well suited to address and operate within, or maybe not so much. And again, these compliance requirements typically are geographic in nature. So depending on where your client base is located, if you sell into healthcare or financial services or government or e-commerce, whatever it is, you more than likely will have certain things that are unique to data center solutions, network design, and implementation that you either have the skills and expertise to do or you don't. So those are the considerations that I would think about with creating your ideal client profile that defines the geographic, company size, and industry specializations that you have for getting new clients. Another thing that I want you to think about when it comes to getting new clients is who the kinds of people are that you need to be building relationships are with in these kinds of companies. So from your ideal client profile, you should be able to go out and build a target account list. This is anywhere from a couple dozen, maybe a couple hundred, perhaps even a couple thousand companies that meet your ideal client profile criteria that you feel would be a really good fit to be a future client of your company. However, we're really not done there, because what we really need to understand is what kinds of stakeholders that you need to educate and build trust with in the awareness, in the earliest stages of the buyer's journey, in the middle stages of the buyer's journey, in the consideration stage of the journey, and at the decision stage where they're finally ready for a sales-related conversation. And that's a big thing that I want to point out as well. We now operate within this self-propelled buyer's journey. What does that mean? 10 years ago, your prospects and clients typically got about halfway through their decision-making process, halfway through their buyer's journey, your sales cycle, and then they were ready to talk with someone from your sales team. At the time, 56% was the predominant stat that was widely regarded as the benchmark. That was from Corporate Executive Board CEB, that's now part of Gartner. At the time, they did research with Sirius Decisions and Salesforce, and they found that 56% of a typical buyer's journey was over before sales contact, before vendor contact. Add in 10 years of digital transformation, add in a lot of baby boomers retiring, add in tens of millions of people working at home for the first couple of years of the 2020s during the pandemic. And we've just had this massive amount of acceleration of self-propelled buyer's journeys, so much to the point that now 83% of a typical research and decision-making process is over before you even get to meet a prospect. 83%. In other words, your prospects and clients are spending most of researching, comparing options, evaluating pricing without you being in the loop. And this is a really big challenge for traditional marketing and sales playbooks that haven't adjusted much over the last 10 years. But it's also a really big opportunity if you're able to figure out what it takes to be the one that is still invited in. And the key to being the one that's still invited in is repositioning your internal client-facing team members to now be seen as consultants, teachers, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and some of them maybe even will rise up to the level of being seen as thought leaders. Does this mean that you should immediately go and switch out the job title on business cards, on LinkedIn profiles, and email signatures? Perhaps, but it's more of a shift in mindset. This is a really big culture change for a lot of companies. And for the most part, depending on your company's size, it's going to likely have to come from the top down, because someone in the C-suite, and if you're a relatively small company with a few hundred or a few dozen employees, this more than likely will have to come down from the CEO. If you're from a company with thousands or tens of thousands of employees, your chief marketing officer, chief revenue officer, chief commercial officer may lead the charge. But someone in a position of extreme authority within your company is going to have to draw a line in the sand and say, going forward, we want our company to be seen as the definitive go-to experts in our space when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center solutions, network design, and implementation. We need to not only be everywhere, but we need our prospects and clients to know that we are the number one experts at our craft, at this niche, at the intersection of specific geographic areas and company sizes and certain kinds of industries or business models. And just like most kinds of digital transformation, just like most kinds of culture changes within companies, this will not happen overnight. This is a marathon, not a sprint. but it requires a lot of alignment. And what you're more than likely going to find is that in order for your client-facing team, especially your sales team, your account executives, your sales development reps, and even post-purchase, your account managers, customer success managers, in order for this to work, they need to be prepared to come in much earlier in the buyer's journey than they ever have before in their careers, so that they're able to be seen as the teachers and the consultants and the trusted advisors. Historically, a lot of salespeople have brushed this off and said, it's marketing's job. They do the webinars, they do the ebooks, they do the blogs, the videos, the podcasts. Just let me know when there's a sales opportunity to talk to. You really no longer have the luxury of that approach if you actually live in today. If you live in the past, if you have your flux capacitor ready to go, and you truly believe that your prospects and your clients are the extreme outliers that are not influenced by looking things up on Google and ChatGPT and Copilot and Perplexity, and they don't ask questions of their peers on LinkedIn and in Slack channels, and they never would watch a webinar. They would never go to an educational session at a conference. They would never be influenced by a podcast or a YouTube video or an online review. If you believe you're selling to the extreme outliers, then I guess maybe you could roll the dice and hope you can milk your old-fashioned playbook for another year or two. But we are really, really at the extreme tail end of being able to bury our heads in the sand about this, because the reality is, especially among data center operators and technology companies in and around the data center ecosystem, they've been running this playbook pretty well for the better part of 10 years now. So you may have decided that your company doesn't need to invest in a great webinar program or have a great YouTube channel or a robust LinkedIn presence that educates and builds trust. But I can assure you that your competitors are not sitting on the sideline. And when it comes to your competitors, it's perhaps a different competitive evaluation that you need to go through. There's direct competitors, there's indirect competitors, and there's non-business model competitors. Most people stop at the direct competitors, but the reality is the indirect competitors, even ones that don't appear to be in your geographic market right now, or don't appear to be directly competing with you because they're either much smaller or much larger, can have a very strong bearing on your ability to educate and build trust and create brand awareness in the marketplace. Because when it comes to things like showing up on a search engine results page, or showing up in YouTube, or showing up on LinkedIn, none of those algorithms care about how big or small the content creator is. All they care about is how good that piece of content was and how well it does with the algorithm. Speaking of content and speaking of events, you also, whether you like it or not, your marketing content, your educational events are going to be in direct competition with non-business model competitors, media and events companies, channel partner programs, anyone that is invested in creating a lot of helpful educational content around the topic where you want to have strong topical expertise. You're going to be needing to compete for attention. And this isn't a one and done battle. Most of the large research firms have found that to get from awareness to consideration and consideration decision throughout the full buyer's journey, there's dozens of touch points now. A good back of the napkin calculation I see a lot of people referring to is 28 touch points. 28 touch points are needed between complete stranger and purchase decision. And for a lot of companies in the data center ecosystem that invest aggressively in conferences and events, it's great that you had that golf tournament. I heard the cabana party poolside at the conference was awesome, but each of those only counts as one touch point. What are you going to do the other 26, 27 times that you need to stay in front of those prospects and clients so they don't forget about you? So you stay top of mind. And it's not a matter of telling your sales team to follow up more vigorously. Your prospects and clients don't want your sales team to follow up more vigorously. What your prospects and clients are craving is information and content and experiences that can help them do their job better, that can help their team get closer to their professional goals, that can help their company overcome some of the biggest challenges that they're facing in growth or whatever else is top of mind for them. And in order to do that, again, we need to show up as consultants, teachers, trusted advisors, subject matter experts, and perhaps even thought leaders that help throughout those full 28 touch points explain to the right stakeholders how other companies in similar industries, in similar company sizes, in similar regions have addressed these same challenges, how other stakeholders, how the primary buyer persona, the secondary buyer persona, whoever it is for your particular roadmap, how each of those have navigated the 28 things that come in, the 28 steps that come in between complete stranger and purchase decision. And the better job you can do with that pattern recognition and anticipating proactively what your prospects and clients need to know next, the more value you can add to them, and the more you can naturally drive sales cycle acceleration. This also is incredibly important for account-based selling, account-based marketing, where you have multiple decision makers, where you don't have a single monolithic decision maker anymore, where you have a whole decision-making committee. Your content and educational events experiences can also have an incredible impact on that. So with all of that in mind, when it comes to getting new clients for data center solutions, network design and implementation, be very careful about having a crisp definition about your ideal client profile. Make sure you understand the stakeholders where you need to build these great trusted advisor kinds of relationships, and invest aggressively as if your company's survival depended on it, in figuring out a way to continually stay with those most important buyer personas throughout their full buyer's journey. So you not only influence the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the other competitive alternatives, but you guarantee that you stay on the short list. And in some cases, you may do such a freaking amazing job that your content, your events experiences, being that trusted advisor and the consultant is so amazingly impactful that you start to gradually knock competitive alternatives off of the short list. You may just discover that in some situations, by the time they get to the decision stage of the journey and they're finally ready for a sales conversation, that you're the last one standing. And your amazingly helpful educational content and amazingly helpful educational experiences and events have effectively neutralized all of the competition. That's how, in today's self-propelled digital buyer's journey, how I would approach building go-to-market sales and marketing playbooks for data center solutions, network design, and implementation. Next question up is, how do you position yourself as a data center relocation subject matter expert? So you want to be seen as a subject matter expert on anything and everything having to do with data center relocations. So the first thing to keep in mind is your business model may either be directly related or have some synonyms to things like data center moving, and perhaps either data center commissioning and decommissioning. Obviously, commissioning and decommissioning is much broader than just the physical move. But the reason I'm pointing out these kind of related categories and these adjacencies is these can be fantastic places for you to build relationships with like-minded peers in other companies, where you can be great referral partners or perhaps even channel partners with each other, where there's some referral fees or things like that for introductions. That said, that's not going to necessarily help you get known as a subject matter expert. In order to be known as a subject matter expert on data center relocations, when it comes to your most important kinds of stakeholders in the most important kinds of companies that you're targeting, you are so ridiculously top of mind that they can't turn around without bumping into some amazingly helpful educational content and educational events where you're teaching about how to do data center relocations successfully. And in order to narrow things down to make this more approachable, I'd first encourage you to look at where you've been most successful in the past. The success leaving clues is probably found directly in your customer relationship management, your CRM, as well as in your case studies page, your logos on your website. What do these folks have in common? What do these companies have in common? Where are they located? Obviously, when it comes to things like relocations, you're physically, your trucks, have to be able to get there. So think about the region where you can successfully market, sell, and run these massive, anywhere from small to massive relocation projects. Second, so once you have the geographic part of it nailed down, think about what company size they need to be for it to be worth your while, and at what company size is it so overwhelming that your company may not be well suited for it. And this is the self-awareness part of it. So at the minimum size, how many employees does a company typically need to have to be big enough to meet your minimums for a data center relocation project? And at what point are they so large, 1,000 employees, 10,000 employees, 100,000 employees, whatever it is, where their needs would be so complex that it may not be something that you could realistically help them with, even if you're just looking at a single location. So only you can answer that. But yeah, I'd encourage you to come up with a geographic part of your ideal client profile as well as a company size. You could have the company size based on a number of servers or amount of square footage or square meters or amount of kilowatts or megawatts of power or something like that. But when it comes to business development, when it comes to your go-to-market, you're more than likely going to want to normalize around number of employees, headcount. Those are things that are easy to search for in LinkedIn and other similar kinds of databases. And in LinkedIn, regardless of whether you're using like Sales Navigator to do outbound or Campaign Manager to run ads, it's super, super helpful to normalize and get a lot more specific about company size. From company size, you can also build a target account list of a couple dozen, a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand companies that would be an ideal fit for you. Obviously, one of the most important parts is you're waiting for a trigger event in these companies where there's a relocation project coming up, where they're going to be moving data centers. And for that, it's good old-fashioned account management. It's good old-fashioned, again, executives to understand, to build deep enough relationships where you are trusted enough that you get kind of the inside track on this happening. You also, as you build out your target account list and you understand the companies, within those companies, there's certain stakeholders that are more than likely going to be involved. And the job titles and the nature of what they do, with how specialized versus how much of a generalist they are, will vary tremendously depending on their company size. In a relatively small enterprise data center environment, a relatively small co-location operators, it's a high certainty that there's no one whose job title actually is data center relocation manager or director of data center relocations. Sometimes it could be all the way up to a facilities or technology or data center manager, data center operations, network operation, whatever it is. It depends on, again, the company size as to who is typically involved. But we know there's a really good chance that within these, and the smaller the company is, the more likely it is that even the secondary, the tertiary buyer persona knows exactly who runs the moves and would be able to point that person in the direction of your great educational resources and your great educational events. And that's really the unlock with all of this, is once you understand who your buyer personas are and the kinds of goals that they're trying to achieve with the data center relocation and the kind of stressors, the kind of challenges that they face with the data center relocation, that should drive your editorial calendar. It should drive your events calendar of the topics that you start to talk about, the topics that you talk about on your blog, the topics that you talk about on your YouTube videos, the topics that you talk about at your webinars, the topics that you talk about in your offline webinars, like your breakfast seminars and lunch and learns and other kinds of speaking engagements, the topics that you might talk about in an ebook or downloadable planning guide. And because those are topical based, there's a much better chance that the people that are actually downloading and engaging with those are looking for specific information about that particular topic. And if you can run the intersection of the intent of what they're searching for with a geographic component and perhaps even a company size component, which is possible with some of the ad platforms, then you get kind of the holy grail of what you're likely looking for as a person from the right geographic region looking for information on this topic, or the person from the right kind of company that's interested in this kind of topic. And then from there, your go-to-market, your sales and marketing playbook is not going to look much different than most other parts of the data center ecosystem. As you're looking to educate and build trust, you're looking for that content to be so amazingly helpful that when you have someone convert on your landing page and fill out a form, and they get back the message that says, who else should read this? Who else should be watching this? Who else should attend this? We know that it takes a village for a successful data center relocation project. Typically, these 3, 4, 5 kinds of stakeholders are involved. So with that in mind, who else on your team should also be reading this, watching this, attending this? Just hit the forward button, add a thought or two on why this matters, and make sure to spread this great, helpful educational content with others on your team. You'd be shocked how that simple, basic email marketing automation that you've been able to do for 20 years, one, that it still works, and two, how well it works. And you'll know how well it works because whether you're getting lead conversion emails or whether you're looking at your CRM or HubSpot or whatever it is, you start to notice that, that's really interesting. 4, 5, 6 people from the same company just registered, just converted, just downloaded within the last hour. They're talking about us. That's amazing. That's the first domino that falls on getting your company, your brand, your helpful expertise to spread among the different stakeholders in this company, among the decision-making committee. All too often, people think that there's a magic decision maker when it comes to a data center relocation project or something like that. The reality is, even if you get to the person who's going to ultimately have to do the sign-off, people are so risk-averse today, they're almost certainly going to send it back to their team, their direct reports, for you to go meet with them. So you may as well build your assets, your content, your educational events, and everything around having content and information and experiences that are so valuable that the stakeholders, no matter how junior or how senior, want to spread your good word around. Because when it comes to building a brand, we're way past the stage where this is something that's limited to just a creative director. Sure, you need a logo and you need a brand guide and you have your hexadecimal colors and you have your fonts that you've standardized on, but your brand is so much more today. Your brand is everything that the marketplace says about your company when you're not in the room. And given that you're not in the room for nearly all of the buyer's journey, only a very, very small percentage of the buyer's journey you're in the room for anymore, what's said about your company is incredibly important. And that's where your educational content, your educational events, experiences often takes the place of what would have been said face-to-face 10 years ago. So if your company is severely underinvested in the kinds of initiatives and the kinds of programs that help establish you as being the definitive data center relocation subject matter expert, I'm here to tell you to get off your behind and get it off the back burner and make this a priority going forward, because the reality is the world that we're moving into now and the self-propelled buyer's journey where people would be willing to walk over broken glass or hot coals to avoid a sales conversation. We got to work extra hard to make an environment conducive to your clients and prospects wanting to spend time with members of your client-facing team because they're adding so much value. And that value largely comes down to your data center relocation client-facing team, especially your account executives and sales development reps, being seen as consultants and trusted advisors and subject matter experts. And the better job you can do with equipping them with the tools and the positioning to make this happen, the more competitive you are and the more likely it is that you have a disproportionate impact on how these companies research and compare options and evaluating pricing for anything and everything having to do with their data center relocation project. Okay, next question up is, how do we prevent fiber transport and co-location client churn? How do we prevent client churn for our fiber transporting co-location business? That's a terrific question. And it's an incredibly important question because typically these kinds of agreements are multi-year agreements. So the last thing in the world you want to do is have someone signed up and get a couple weeks or a couple months into their agreement and they start to have some serious buyer's remorse. They may be contractually obligated, but in a world where so much of your success is driven by digital word of mouth, you really can't afford to have dissatisfied clients anymore. So what we're really talking about here is preventing client churn isn't just, sure, it starts pre-sales. It starts with making sure that your client-facing team is positioned as the definitive go-to experts in your space when it comes to co-location and fiber transport at the intersection of your geographic location and these companies' size as well as their industry. Sure, it starts pre-sale, but a lot of what happens with client churn is heavily impacted by account managers, often known as customer success managers, as well as product managers. Why does so much of client churn fall on the shoulders of your account managers and your product managers? Well, let's start with the product managers. If your product roadmap, if your product feature set is not competitive with other alternatives in the marketplace, both locally and regionally and nationally, and perhaps even globally, then you're going to have a hard time closing and retaining clients for fiber transport and colocation. So it's incumbent upon your product manager to get close enough to your ideal clients that they're getting this kind of feedback on a regular basis and feeding this into your R&D budget and feeding this into your engineering and your CTO, and perhaps even, depending on your company size, all the way up to your CEO, about what needs to be done to make your suite of products and services and solutions more competitive. Another place where client churn can be a make or break is immediately post-purchase. So when it comes to the relationship that your clients have with their account managers, their AMs, or their customer success managers, their CSMs, you want to make sure that you've invested in creating a fantastic, seamless onboarding experience so your clients get to initial value, intended value, and extended value. So you map out really the full journey on what they're expecting from your company. It's also extremely important that you don't try to prematurely upsell or cross-sell until you've gotten to that point of initial value and intended value. Asking for a larger sale before you've proven yourself, before you've delivered on what you promised, is a recipe for burning a lot of goodwill. And this is especially challenging in the world we live in now, where so many account management teams, customer success teams, are reporting to a chief revenue officer. Because in the not so distant long ago, perhaps as recently as 5 or 10 years ago, it was fairly common for customer success and service to have some degree of autonomy and being focused largely on things like Net Promoter Score. As these teams have become realigned and now reporting directly to someone who's responsible for immediate revenue generation, there are some cringeworthy situations where newly onboarded clients are immediately put into aggressive cross-sell, upsell kind of motions. And that can be a really, really big, obviously your CRO doesn't think it's a big mistake, but it's definitely not something that most clients are probably hoping for. So make sure that you think through how you can measure success with onboarding, initial value, and intended value before you start working on extended value. Along the same lines, customer marketing can be fantastic. It's a great way to expose big segments of your clients to other ways that you can help them. But again, make sure that you've delivered on the minimum viable promises that were made by your marketing and sales team pre-sales before you worry about what you're going to do to extend and increase the monetization that you have with individual accounts. So even relatively small companies, from a tactical standpoint, to reduce client churn, great knowledge base, good support response time, good onboarding email sequence, good self-help videos that explain how to do a lot of the basics, both live and on-demand webinars. You could do Getting Started with Your Company 101 as a recurring weekly onboarding live session that someone from your CS, your account management team, does with newly onboarded clients. I'd highly recommend that be a collaborative effort where, at least on a somewhat frequent basis, product is involved with that as well, so they can see where some of the gaps are, some of the questions are that people are asking about. And any question that's asked that's not already covered in knowledge base or covered in videos or proactively being dealt with, that's a candidate for having a content asset that can help people lean into self-help resources, as well as something that perhaps should be added onto a product roadmap. So yeah, simple, basic things like onboarding email sequence, videos, self-help portal, Getting Started webinars, both available live and on demand. We may even want to have a community where your clients can talk to each other and self-help and troubleshoot each other's tickets. If you have Channel partners, if you partner with like managed service providers for your fiber transport or co-location, they could potentially be in there addressing questions as well. And as long as they don't go over the top, they don't get too tacky, they certainly can have in their email signature that they provide services to help people get more out of your companies, extend what they're doing with your fiber transport and co-location. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can approach driving down client churn. You certainly can do, it's not really win-loss analysis, but churn analysis. Go through your CRM, look at your last 10, 20, 30 clients that churned. Hopefully it's not that many if you're a relatively small company, but look at your recent churn and look at why they churned and do that post-mortem and make sure that your product managers, your leadership team are aware of the reasons why this particular client churned and see if you're going to be able to close the gap on what was missing that caused this client to churn in the first place, to see if it's something that's reasonable that you could address in the coming weeks and the coming months, or is it something that's so far above where you're currently at that it's more a multi-year kind of goal to close that goal that would prevent that specific kind of churn. So those are some of the things that I would be thinking about for how to prevent both fiber transport and co-location client churn on a human to human basis, on a self-serve kind of basis, deep within the journey, both from an account management perspective as well as from a product management perspective. And channel partnerships, channel account managers have a different kind of churn. There's a lot more at stake if they lose a channel partner, because the channel partner could have brought 10, 20, 30 clients to your company for fiber transport and co-location over the years. So you certainly want to make sure that the partner doesn't churn, and you want to make sure that as many of their clients that they brought in also doesn't churn. Because if one of your partner's clients has a crappy experience, it's possible that has a ripple effect where they start actively discouraging new clients from coming into your company for fiber transport and co-location. And they may look to start to actively migrate out that existing book of business to alternatives if they don't believe in what you're doing anymore. So yeah, channel partnerships is a whole different kind of playbook and even more extreme urgency for preventing churn, both of the partner and the partner's book of business that they've brought in the door. So those are some of the key considerations that I would be thinking about when it comes to preventing fiber transport and co-location client churn. I'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor, and we'll be right back.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey, it's Joshua Feinberg here from DCSMI, host of the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A weekly live stream, where I address a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about globally throughout the full data center ecosystem. Next question up is, how does a data center related startup request face-to-face research on industry challenges? So how can a data center related startup get face-to-face research on industry challenges? Couple of ways come to mind. What it largely comes down to is when you have a startup and you do not yet have product market fit, a lot of your goal to get to PMF, to get to product market fit, is to increase the frequency at which you're having meaningful conversations with who you believe to be your ideal clients. And those conversations can happen in a number of different ways. This particular person is asking for face-to-face. I would argue that face-to-face is great, but this kind of face-to-face in a video conference like a Zoom call could be almost as valuable and perhaps be more practical depending on the resources that your company has. Face-to-face number two potentially is going to a conference and sitting and having a lot of coffee dates, having a lot of beers, hopefully not too many that it makes you punchy, but getting to good, insightful conversations over lunches, over breakfasts, over dinners, to understand, get feedback on what you're working on. And then, of course, you can host your own events as well, where you'd be in a position to informally get some of this feedback. A lot of people do really well hosting like roundtable breakfast discussions, dinner discussions, where they moderate a conversation with 8, 10, 12 people that are from your audience. However, you need to be really careful because there needs to be something in it for them. Nobody really wants to attend your sales pitch. And if you say it's going to be a roundtable discussion that's going to provide a lot of value for each of the people attending to learn from their peers, you can learn from them too, but it shouldn't feel like it was a bait and switch to get them there under false pretenses to pitch them on something. So those are a couple of different ways to get face-to-face research on industry challenges. You certainly could visit like some LinkedIn groups to see what people are talking about. And some of the LinkedIn groups, they're kind of like article spam fests where people are just dropping in a lot of self-promotional stuff. So that may not be especially effective, but I'm very partial to both Zoom interviews, the in-person version of Zoom interviews, just getting together informally with people for coffee, breakfast, lunch, and kind of bouncing your idea off of them and getting some informal feedback. Doing the same thing at a conference. You could host your own event. You could host your own webinars. You could host your own Q&A show. We learn a ton just by getting these questions in. We go through a couple hundred questions a year from all over the data center ecosystem, from operators, technology companies, facilities companies, construction and real estate companies, from all different go-to-market related roles within these companies, how CEOs articulate their biggest challenges, how marketing and sales people explain their challenges, how product managers, how channel partnership managers, how account managers articulate their challenges. So when you get all of this data together, you'll start to see trends within certain segments, and you'll start to see some consensus among all of the segments aggregated together. But the biggest challenge for a startup is you don't know what you don't know. And early on, the goal is to get to product market fit, where you know exactly who your ideal clients are, you know exactly the product or service that they purchase, you know the price points that they purchase that at, you know how often they come back to repurchase that or the duration of their agreement. You start to back into understanding your unit economics, like lifetime value, average sales cycle length, cost of acquisition, cost of goods sold, whatever it is, to better understand the metrics that are going to, the financial dashboard that you're going to use to score your success and scale up. But getting more face-to-face research, a lot of times you can double dip your content marketing, your educational thought leadership kind of initiatives with research at the same time. In other words, an interview-based podcast is largely going to ask very similar kinds of questions that a product manager may ask. Polling questions at a webinar may ask similar kinds of questions that you might ask in a user feedback survey that you'd send out. So there's a lot of different ways to gather this information. Obviously, the beauty of face-to-face is you can body language, you can adjust your questions on the fly. But there's a lot of different ways to capture industry research on challenges that your specific kind of buyer personas are facing in these specific kinds of companies. I'd encourage you to use all of the above and get as close to original research as you can, so you're not worried about someone's business model bias impacting what's actually been reported to you. So get as close to the source as possible when it comes to doing this research on industry challenges. Their own words matter a ton. I see so many people mess that part up where they're leaning on information from their internal sales team or their customer success team or their CEO. And it's good to have that anecdotal feedback, but nothing beats getting the words out of the mouth directly from the buyer personas, directly from the stakeholders, so you make sure you get the messaging right. Because their words versus what you think their words are could be like the difference between night and day with what you're proposing actually resonating versus it falling flat. Next question up is, how do we use social media for data center solutions, telecommunications, and IT infrastructure lead generation? So how can a company that provides data center solutions, telecommunications, and IT infrastructure use their social media for lead generation? So a couple things come to mind. For starters, whenever people ask me for tips and best practices around lead generation, one of the biggest problems that I see across the data center industry is different people within different parts of the company use the word lead differently. For a marketing professional, it's very common to think of a lead as someone that's filled out a form on a landing page for a piece of premium content, like a downloadable ebook or a planning guide, or registering for a webinar, or registering for an offline event. That's a lead. However, salespeople often think of leads as someone that is expecting their call, that's ready to talk about spending money with their company. A marketing ops person, a sales ops person would consider that kind of context a known person that's ready to talk with a salesperson that can have a projected deal size and forecasted close date attached to it. That would be considered a sales opportunity, different kind of life cycle stage in your CRM. So first, make sure that you get on the same page about what lead generation actually means to you and your company, because that can prevent an enormous amount of disagreements and finger pointing between your marketing and sales colleagues. Next up is in a self-propelled buyer's journey, which is the predominant buyer's journey that most data center telecommunications and IT infrastructure companies need to contend with now. Most of your best prospects and clients don't want to speak with your sales team anymore until the absolute end of their research and decision-making process. The self-propelled, the self-driven buyer's journey is a huge deal. And it's not going to roll backwards. If anything, it's going to keep pushing further and further to the right, where people are willing to walk over hot coals, broken glass, whatever it is, to avoid sales conversations. The sales allergies have become extreme. So in order for your client-facing team to get in early and often and be in a position to actually shape the purchase criteria for data center related products and services, telecommunications, IT infrastructure related products and services, we need to provide so much value that your marketers and your sales development reps and your account executives seem a lot more like consultants and teachers and trusted advisors, and a lot less focused on being SDRs and being AEs and being marketers. And in order to do that, we need to have extreme empathy about what our buyer personas care most about when it comes to our categories, when it comes to data center, telecommunications, and IT infrastructure. And the only way you're going to get there with that extreme empathy is to be laser focused on who they are and what they care about and doing the actual research. So this starts with documenting your ideal client profile, your ICP, so you know exactly where these kinds of clients are located, what their company size is in terms of headcount. Yeah, square footage, square meters, kilowatts and megawatts could be interesting. But when it comes to prospecting and targeting for things like lead generation and buyer persona research, you're going to need to normalize around number of employees, or what's sometimes called headcounts. So we know where they're located. In many cases, when it comes to things like lead generation offers and social media, that may also drive a decision as to whether you're just doing content and promotion in English or in other languages as well. So we know where they're located, we know their company size, and we also need to know what industries they're in, what their business models are. For example, are you predominantly selling data center telecommunications and IT infrastructure to manufacturing companies, healthcare companies, financial services companies, education, government, professional services? Why is this important? Because some of those categories are highly regulated. And because they're highly regulated, you'll almost certainly, one, need to address those kinds of related concerns in your lead generation offers. But even more so is, does it make sense to be creating lead generation offers for that kind of business if you do not have the expertise to be able to sell to and service those kinds of clients? So this is why it's so important to use a ideal client profile and ICP to get everyone on the same page on your go-to-market team. Your executive leadership, your product managers, your account managers, your sales leadership, your marketing managers. It's a really, really important alignment tool. Then from there, we need to know who are the kinds of stakeholders in these companies that care most about data center, telecommunications, and IT infrastructure. And the category of stakeholders we care most about, we're going to call our primary buyer persona. They have the biggest economic bearing usually on the research and decision-making process. The second most important kind of stakeholder, second biggest category of stakeholder that we care most about, we'll call our secondary buyer persona. And then you may even have a tertiary buyer persona, a third category of stakeholder that's involved that probably isn't driving the decision, but often can have a big impact. You'd call that a tertiary buyer persona. You may also, over time in large deals, discover that there's a certain kind of person that if they show up during this process, it's like the kiss of death. That you'd call the negative buyer persona. We want to actively exclude them from our outbound and our ads, and have places on the drop-down list where we know with like a skull and crossbones that if this person gets invited to the meeting, they're going to for sure scuttle the deal. So that's a really important part of getting the targeting right and the segmentation and the personalization right. Once you know that, you'll be in a position to create super helpful educational content offers for lead generation. They could be downloadable ebooks, research reports, planning guides, having a great webinar. I highly recommend having a great webinar program for your different buyer personas and your different stages that they go through. The more time they spend with you, the less time they're spending with your competitors, and the more you're going to be able to educate and build trust with those folks in a way that truly stacks the decks in your favor. So they spend as many of those 28 touch points as possible between complete stranger and purchase decision. Your buyer personas will help you prioritize. It'll help you prioritize your content and your events topics to align directly with each buyer persona's biggest goals and biggest challenges, and where they hang out online and offline. That'll help you prioritize where you promote these lead generation content offers, both on a paid and on an organic basis, on an outbound basis. But at the end of the day, your social media should also be driven by your buyer personas. Good buyer persona research should illuminate which channels matter the most, and even within those channels, what groups are most relevant, what hashtags are most relevant. For most buyer personas that are relevant to data center, telecommunications, and IT infrastructure, it used to be debatable 5 or 10 years ago which channels mattered the most. It's come into extreme focus in recent years. With more than a billion users worldwide on its platform, LinkedIn has won the battle. You really don't need to have heavy coverage across all social media. But if your stakeholders, if your buyer personas are like most internal champions for things related to data centers, telecommunications, and IT infrastructure, they're almost certainly spending at least some of their week, at least some of their month, at least some of their day active on LinkedIn. So that's where you're going to want to have them, most likely your presence. And again, your buyer persona research should evaluate and should validate that that's true. And we'll give you more specifics on the groups that matter most and the topics and the hashtags that matter most. But in nearly all cases, in today's self-propelled buyer's journey, LinkedIn is incredibly important. Another channel that sometimes people think about as social media, sometimes people think about it as search, or a little bit of both, is YouTube. And the reason YouTube is super important is YouTube not only is the second most popular search engine on the planet, but in many ways, if your marketing team is concerned about the disappearance of traditional search engine results pages that would impact all the big investments that your company may have made historically in SEO and search engine optimization, YouTube actually is a really good hedge against that, because YouTube has a very different ads model than will likely be the result of how the traditional search-based ads model is disrupted. So the added benefit with YouTube is you have by presenting the same information in video format, which you're experiencing right now, you build a deeper emotional bond. If you've ever heard the expression that a picture is worth 1,000 words and a video is worth 1,000 pictures, you know exactly what I'm talking about with this. Video also has the added benefit of not only getting you placement on a search engine results page, but when you take that same video and you embed that on a page on your website, it increases the session time, which decreases your bounce rate. That helps to improve your search results. The more likely that they'll consume all of your content, they'll stay longer. When they stay longer, you're building even more trust, the more receptive to your calls to action for your other lead generation offers. So yeah, I'd highly recommend. And again, of course, your buyer persona research should validate the specifics of how you approach this. but LinkedIn and YouTube are usually very, very important for most companies that are selling something related to data center telecommunications and IT infrastructure. So once you've made those kind of investments and you have good conversion paths, good landing pages, good lead nurturing sequences that follow up with those leads and continue to educate and build trust and add value, then and only then are you in a good position to start promoting your lead generation content offers on social media, regardless of whether they're for data centers or telecommunications or IT infrastructure. Start from a position of extreme empathy, really roll up your sleeves and get deep into understanding the goals and the challenges of your most important buyer personas. Build amazingly helpful educational content offers, educational events, experiences where you can share your deep expertise and wisdom with your most important buyer personas in a way that educates and builds trust, earns you a virtual seat on their side of the table so you stay with them throughout the full buyer's journey. All too often when people are approaching social media or lead generation out of the gate, they're in a huge rush to try to close people prematurely. It's kind of like someone going out on a first date and proposing marriage and then getting annoyed that, what do you mean you don't want to get married on our first date? Sounds ridiculous when you say that, right? You could kind of picture like Ashton Kutcher or Cameron Diaz or Justin Timberlake or Mila Kunis or something like that doing a movie about that. But it would be a romantic comedy movie. It wouldn't be a real life thing that most people go through. Most people don't want you to try to close a sale on the first date. It doesn't matter whether you're buying a home, purchasing a car, buying data centers, telecommunication services, IT infrastructure. It takes a while to educate and build trust. And you'll learn your buyer's journey patterns over time. You'll learn your average sales cycle length over time. But the reality is it's a lot of touch points to earn people's trust. So social media can be a great way to get people into your awareness stage offers and do a little bit of acceleration, but just approach it from their standpoint of what they care most about, add value to their professional lives so that you can educate and build trust. And then a lot of the great things that you're looking for will ultimately happen. If you try to push everyone into a tour, if you try to push everyone into a demo, even if you try to bribe them with a gift card, it usually backfires. Building a brand is everything that the marketplace says about you when you're not in the room. And given that by default, most sales teams are not in the room for much of the buyer's journey anymore, you have to really have to work extra hard to get in there early and often. Helpful educational content at the intersection of who they are, what they do in their job, and what their company does and where they're located in their company's size. The more hyper specific it is, the more likely it is that you just have a jaw-dropping reaction on their side of, oh my gosh, I can't believe someone created this. I have to see this. It's so ridiculously relevant for who we are and what we're going through. Who is this company again? What do they do? When you get that reaction, that's when they start to let their guard down a little bit. Some of the natural anti-marketing, anti-sales kind of skepticism and cynicism starts to melt away, and they start to actually be open to your advice. So that's how a company that sells things related to data centers, telecommunication, and IT infrastructure can successfully use social media to improve its lead generation. And that brings us to our final question in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. And the final question that we'll have time to address this week is, how do we get more new cybersecurity and IT infrastructure clients to sign up? How do we get more new cybersecurity and IT infrastructure clients to sign up? So we need to understand what your company does and where it's been most successful. For starters, sign up to me sounds like a self-service e-commerce kind of call to action. And depending on the nature of what you do, that may be the right language to use. If you sell something that's kind of transactional, self-service kind of e-commerce. In other words, like if you're selling public cloud, if you're selling infrastructure as a service, if you're selling a subscription to something that's relatively inexpensive, might be an impulse buy, signing up could be okay. Most people typically don't sign up for something super long-term. In other words, like people usually, when they talk about getting married, talk about getting engaged and getting into like a life partnership. When they talk about getting recruited or joining a company, they don't talk about signing up for a company. Actually, when they use those words in that context, it's usually a little bit sarcastic. Like, this isn't what I signed up for when it comes to a job or a marriage that's having trouble or something like that. So language matters, and the language of what the appropriate language to use on your website is for that call to action will almost certainly come up in your buyer persona research when you get super specific about understanding the exact words that your most important stakeholders use when they research and compare options and evaluate pricing and progress through their buyer's journey from awareness to consideration and ultimately in decisions. So as you're interviewing people, as you're getting deeper into understanding the language that they would use to describe how they prioritized initiative and how they move forward, you'll probably get words that'll come out of their mouth and hopefully get some consensus on that. Sign up could be, if it's transactional, may not be if you're selling a 5-figure, 6-figure, 7-figure data center, telecommunications, cybersecurity enterprise kind of deal. On the prosumer side, probably if you're selling inexpensive antivirus software and endpoint protection to a small, medium-sized business, signing up for a subscription for sure. Selling that same agreement to 100,000 seats for a huge pharmaceutical company, they're probably not signing up. They're probably engaging, partnering, contracting for something like that. To get more of your cybersecurity and IT infrastructure clients to sign up probably infers that you have some kind of relationship with them already, meaning that they're warm leads. Maybe they're newsletter subscribers. Maybe they've downloaded some of your premium educational content. Maybe they're coming to your educational events like your webinars or your live streams or your breakfast seminars or your lunch and learns or symposia or something like that. And you're wondering how you can improve how those leads progress to closed won, how they move from being like opportunities or warm leads to being new customers, new sources of revenue. And what that largely is going to come down to is really understanding what makes someone want to prioritize your cybersecurity solutions, your IT infrastructure solutions. So we're back again to understanding the active research process that someone goes through between complete stranger and purchase decision. That's your basic buyer persona research. And more than likely, they're going to have a different journey for cybersecurity compared to IT infrastructure, because one could have extreme urgency and maybe a fear-based sale. The other one may not be so much. So again, understanding your segmentation approach, understanding how you're going to market makes an enormous difference. Second, the price point that you're selling at, the company size that you're selling to, could have an enormous bearing on how you approach your go-to-market and your sales and marketing playbook. Different stakeholders also are motivated by different kinds of messaging. What does that mean? In a lot of companies, cybersecurity is directly related to GRC, governance, risk, compliance, way beyond just the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer. So because of that, a lot of times there have been financial executives that get involved in these kinds of conversations because, like in the US especially, SOC is typically something that not uncommon to see accounting firms getting involved in that kind of business. So it's really important to understand by the nature of what kind of cybersecurity products and services you sell and what kind of IT infrastructure products and services you sell. Who is the ideal client? Who are the buyer personas that matter most? What do they care most about? And how can you deliver extreme value to them throughout their full buyer's journey? So how you segment your market is going to be incredibly important. How you segment and personalize your messaging is going to be extremely important. Other things being equal in both of these categories, good segmented marketing, good segmented personalization, good sales enablement delivered by targeted email marketing that educates and builds trust over time with contextually relevant calls to action. Webinar series, educational webinar series where you're educating and building trust that are specific to a certain kind of buyer persona, that are specific to certain kinds of problems, specific to a certain stage of the journey. Those almost universally work. For most companies, however, they're trying to close prematurely. it's really important to understand that a huge percentage, what do they say, typically 90-95% of the people you encounter are not in market right now, meaning they could be a really good fit for you a couple of weeks or a couple of months out, but not today. That's where your email marketing, that's where your event strategy of staying in front of them over an extended period of time, over weeks and months, perhaps even years, can make all the difference in the world. So at the end of the day, are you playing the long game, or are you strictly looking for short-term hit and run? Most of your competitors are going to be playing a long game. So think about how you want to show up. What can also be really influential with getting more of your cybersecurity and IT infrastructure clients to take the next step with your company is introducing them to others that are in companies similar to theirs that have been successful with your cybersecurity and IT infrastructure solutions. Some people call this social proof. Some people call this reviews, testimonials, case studies. In some cases, you can even infuse this together into your content marketing program. Case study videos, case study PDFs, case study blogs. I'm also a huge believer in live case studies in webinars, like webinar panels, where you bring one or more clients together and ask them a series of questions about this particular topic. Again, as with all of this, none of your prospects and clients want to feel like they're attending an infomercial. So you always need to lead from a position of, does this provide educational value? I actually have a filtering mechanism that I use when I'm at these kind of decision points that you may want to adopt as well. I call it, is this conference grade content? What does it mean for a webinar? What does it mean to an event you're hosting to rise up to the level of being conference grade content? Well, if you have ever been through the process of one or more of your colleagues speaking at a major industry conference, whether it's a cybersecurity conference, data center, IT security conference, managed services conference, they're speaking at a major conference, and they're speaking based on the editorial merits, the value of their information. In other words, they didn't pay for a sponsored session. They're on the website, they're in the PDF, they're on the agenda because of the merits of who they are and what they're going to talk about. So the way the process typically works for a major conference is, assuming this is an annual conference, about 6 to 8, maybe sometimes as much as 10 months before the conference producer sends out a call for speakers. Sometimes they call it a call for papers, call for white papers or speaker submissions. And if someone on your team thinks that they have some really helpful information that attendees at this conference would love to hear about when it comes to cybersecurity and IT infrastructure, they'll submit an application to speak at this conference. To submit this application, they're typically asking for a working title. What would the session be called? They're asking for a few sentences or an outline of what you would cover. And they may ask for either a YouTube video to a place where you've spoken before, or some speaking credentials on where you've spoken in the past. So they make sure that, this isn't your first rodeo. So in many cases, that can be an incredibly competitive process. So competitive that there's a lot of cybersecurity companies and IT infrastructure companies who invest huge sums of money with agencies that are specialized in helping to make that happen more regularly, keeping track of application deadlines, helping to package these speaker submissions together, and helping these things sometimes to sail through for reasons that are unbeknownst to the general public. So there's a speaker submission process. Once the speaker applications are received, they're typically reviewed by the conference producer. Hopefully this is someone who is primarily focused on the editorial merits of having great conference content, as opposed to the commercial interests of, is this person that's going to speak also someone we can sell a really big booth or sponsorship to? Obviously, the first is preferable for the guests. The second is preferable for the profit and loss statement of the conference or media company. And in some cases, in addition to the conference producer, an advisory council, a committee of people that's like the steering committee for that particular conference, will look at those stack of applications and make recommendations for what should go on the yes versus no list. If you think of like a college application process, it's kind of like a micro version of all of that. So 10 months before this happens, 6 months before, a couple weeks later, a month or two later, speakers get back. Congratulations, you've been selected. We're thrilled that you're going to be speaking at our conference. Here's the next step. We need your bio, we need your photo, we need your final slides by this date using this particular template. Or oh, we're very sorry, we don't have room for you this year, apply next year. And also feel free to buy a really large booth on the trade show floor so you can have a presence at this conference, even though we didn't want you speaking at the conference. Oh, actually, you can buy a sponsored speaking slot. We do have opportunities for that too. So conference grade content, does it pass the first level screening? The second level screening is you're on the conference website. You're able to speak at the conference. They've been publicizing your photo, your bio, your topic, a little abstract of what you're going to talk about. About 8 weeks before the conference, using the conference organizer's PowerPoint template, they want your slides. Why do they want your slides? Because they want to make sure that you're going to deliver a lot of value to the audience and that it's not going to turn into an infomercial or one big sales pitch. Because they know if too many people do that, then the attendee experience sucks and people won't come back next year. And on top of that, you'll get crappy reviews of your session on the mobile app. So conference grade check and balance number 1, did it pass the application process? Conference grade content checkpoint number 2, are your slides good enough that most people on the advisory council believe you're going to deliver a lot of value in that session? Conference grade content check and balance number 3, it's the day of the conference. Your room is hopefully mostly filled. Some of that will be within your control. Some of that may not be within your control, depending on the time of day you're speaking or whether you're speaking the last possible slot of the last possible conference day when a lot of people have departed. There's a lot can influence how full the room is. But you want to make sure for a conference grade content experience that you have an amazing impact on the people in the room. And the way you'll know that you did that is because you put a lot of thought into your slides, you put a lot of thought into rehearsing, and you're highly confident that most people in the room, one, are going to stay for the entire session, and most people in the room are going to give you 5 out of 5 on the conference mobile app. So when it comes to conference grade content and using kind of that filter on your webinar program, is it good enough that your application would pass the first round of approval? Is the title good enough? Is the abstract good enough? Second, are the slides good enough? And third, are you highly confident that everyone that attends your webinar is going to stay through the full webinar? And when the feedback survey comes out, that you're going to get amazingly positive 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10 kind of reviews for the experience and the value that they got from attending your session. Bearing in mind that a lot of people that are at your conference session didn't just have to log on to Zoom or go to webinar or a virtual event. They actually flew across the country at several days out of the office at great expense. And this was one of the 20 sessions, 10 sessions, whatever it is, that they chose to invest with their vote of confidence to attend your sessions. So that's how I define conference grade content. And if you approach your webinar program from that perspective of extreme empathy for your buyer personas and understanding their goals and their challenges and delivering a ton of value to help them better what they're doing professionally, to help their teams, to help their companies achieve their goals, overcome their biggest challenges at the intersection of your topic and what your company actually does. What your company actually does is usually a very secondary consideration to them. Most conference organizers will let you have a little call to action at the end for people that want to learn more, connect with you on LinkedIn, visit a landing page, fill out downloadable resource, come up to you afterwards and get your business card, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, conference grade content is about delivering a ton of value that helps you earn mind share and educate and build trust. And that's one of the biggest ways that a cybersecurity and IT infrastructure company can get more of its clients to sign up, is to replicate that model on a very regular basis using your email marketing and your webinar program. So that's the final question that we'll have time to address in this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live stream. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. If you've gotten good value from today's session, make sure that you hit the like button. Feel free to add a comment if you have a question or an idea for what we should cover in one of our upcoming live streams. And if you don't already get it, I would highly recommend subscribing to our weekly email newsletter at www.dcsmi.com. Until next time, I wish you great success in growing your role, your team's role, and your company's influence throughout the data center ecosystem. Take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.